So now that we've looked at the basic brush setup, we can now look at the brush settings and the panel that will dynamically change the brush usage. So we've got it up here kind of showing, but if you haven't, you can just click onto the little icon next to the actual brush size itself. So this is the toggle the brush settings panel, and you can see it loads from here. Or you could actually click onto Windows and actually click onto the brush settings, and that will launch the actual settings as well. Okay, so we know what this kind of does. So the brush tip shape pretty much will work in exactly the same way. So having the brush settings open at this point is really not doing much, except we can actually change the way that the brush spaces itself out. And obviously we can go ahead and change the sharpness and the size of the brush. Now if we had a shaped brush, we would also be able to actually change the actual way that it angles by using the actual dial here to actually change the direction of the actual brush. But because mine's round, obviously it doesn't have any effect on here at all. So spacing, as you can see, if it's set to 0 or 1%, it's basically just going to actually add the whole amount across. But if we put a spacing in it and I do the same thing, it's going to leave a space between the different levels. Okay, I'm going to quickly swap a different brush, so you can see the effects that we're going to do. So in brushes, obviously you can see all the different brushes that you have down here. It depends on the ones that you use. There's things even like maple brushes. Let me just bring this up a little bit bigger so you can see the actual shape. And its design is actually, as we kind of roll across it, in its dynamic. If we look at the brush settings now, you'll see that there's lots of different things going on. So in other words, it's not just the actual brush tip shape that is beginning to change, but it's also the way that the shape dynamic, the scattering, the color dynamic, the transfer, the smoothing. So we're going to explain these a little bit now as we go. So let's click back open again. Let's go and choose another shape brush. I'm just going to pick up my lips brush. This is a custom brush that I made for our boudoir photography. And if I just go ahead and actually click it, you can see it's basically somebody's put their lips onto a white piece of paper. I've scanned it in or photographed it, then I added it, just created it in black and white, then I defined it as a new brush. Just by going up into Edit and then Define Brush Preset. So let's use this brush shape here so we can actually see how it's going to change within the whole look. So stepping backwards again, we'll go back into the brush settings. Remember, in the brush tip, this is exactly the same as far as the size is concerned. So there's all my little lips, yes. Now we have the spacing. So if I just make that a little bit bigger, you can see how it's beginning to work there. If I put the spacing involved though, you can start to see even on the panel here how the brush itself is going to work. So it's going to move them apart, and I'm not letting go of the mouse as I drag the brush down. It's naturally allowing that spacing within the whole thing. Okay, so I'm actually not doing anything there because I've set it in the actual spacing element. So once we start to actually work with that, we can then start to actually look and click onto the shape dynamics, and this is where the shape size jitter will actually work. So as I click around the image, you can see it's getting bigger and smaller, and if I start with a very big brush, probably you can actually see it a little bit better because it's changing its size in jitter. Okay, so in other words, every time I click, it's changing itself. In the same way, if we go back to the shape dynamic, sorry, the brush tip, and we move that spacing apart again like we saw, when I now come into the shape dynamic and I move the jitter, let's do it first of all so you can see that it's kind of just pushing across. That's all I'm doing. I've just pushed my brush from left to right, and it allowed that little bit of space in between the image. But now if I do the jitter quite a lot, you can see if I do the same thing, how it's changing its size up and down as I go through the image. And that's just to do with the shape dynamic and the size and the jitter. Obviously we can choose the minimum diameter, we can do the angle of them as well, so if we just change it, it's going to change the angle, and then obviously resolution wise it's going to torque the same brush no matter what resolution that we're on, because obviously it's going to adjust to the res. It's just the physical brush size that is going to be the difference. So once we've done that, of course, if we do the scatter now, so if before I change the scatter, let's just push those across again. Now if I increase the scatter, it's going to actually scatter the brush straight away. So that would be great for confetti or the likes of a leaf, just to actually add that little bit of difference. Same thing as far as the count jitter is concerned, we can increase it. And then once we set these things, we can start to actually add a texture into the actual brush by selecting the panel up here where we can actually put anything into the brush texture we want. I'm going to click that off for now. Dual brush allows you to actually select another brush as well, so we can use two brushes at the same time and make use of their different characteristics. So you can see here it's completely doing a different kind of effect now because it's mixing the two brushes together. Whereas if I just press and spread around again without the dual brush on, it's not taking account of the hard small brush that we just chose as well. Obviously you'd go in and actually change the actual brush to suit each other. Color dynamics affects the color, of course. The transfer itself affects the opacity. So just actually going through here, and now if I actually put the opacity jitter up again and I do the same thing, it's going to go either hard or light and so on with it. So it depends on the actual amount of flow that we actually want to put in the image, so it starts to actually be showing through. Let me just show you that on a clean canvas there, so you can start to see how the opacity begins to change. Tell you what I didn't say is that when we're working in the shape dynamic, in fact, I usually work in the pen pressure mode. Even if I'm using a mouse, that has a little bit of an effect as well. As far as the brush pose is concerned, that's to do with the tilt. The noise, obviously you can add noise in towards the brush effect as well at the same time. Wet edges will give you more of a kind of a watercolor effect if we click it on. Build up means it's actually adding paint on paint on paint. The smoothing is the softness, and obviously if we want to protect the texture behind, we can click onto that as well. So I know it's a little bit to play around with, but you do have to go up and set up your brushes. And remember, at any stage, if you've downloaded free brushes online, all you would do is to load in those brushes. You can basically double click and they'll install, or you can go into the little kind of hamburger up in the top right hand side there and go and actually click into there and basically click on import brushes, and then you select where they're coming from. And that is the kind of getting going with brushes. Hope you've learned something there.